Rwandan President Paul Kagame has raised his hand for the fourth term in office. That's in the upcoming elections next year. The 65-year-old, who has been in power since the year 2000, confirmed he's running for the first, he's confirmed he's running, and this was sometime this week. While President Kagame has been hailed for developing the country since he took office, he has also been criticized by some for presiding over the controversial constitutional amendments in 2015, which allowed him to run for another term and stayed in power. Well, the suggestions now is that he might actually be in office up until 2034 or 35. Let's get some analysis now as to what actually this means for Rwanda. And we speak to Joseph Ochieno, who is a writer and commentator on African affairs. Mr. Ochieno, thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with...
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks indeed for your time. Let's talk about President Kagame. At the previous election, he obtained just over 90% of electoral support. Do you think that this is part of why he thinks that he remains popular among ordinary Rwandans, that he feels that a fourth term is indeed in the offing for him?
You know, a late President Newzroom Afrika told me in the 90s, and the time when South Africa was just coming into democracy and we were young African activists learning politics, and that any majority, whatever it is, you should be happy with that. And when you win elections, you should have the humility to recognize that 100% of the voters are your burden of responsibility. I think that's part of the challenge facing African polity and African leadership. In fact, the ANC's move to the nearly two-thirds majority in one of those early elections, 67% or thereabout, that was impressive, that was massive, that is unusual. Any victories, any percentages that you see going to 70% plus in free, fair, open societies, you must be very, very suspicious. When it hits 90, you know it's almost close to abnormal. Granted, there are issues in Rwanda. Granted, there was a genocide. Granted that Kagame came and it was a power base for that. But it's absolutely commonsensical that 90% is an artificial victory for him. And that is the case that, of course, this guy has been in power for such a long time. His political party and organization have been in power for such a long time. And that they basically came as one group to replace the other.
Yeah.
That said, as your clip said much earlier, Kagame, for whatever you can criticize him for, has managed to focus on building Rwanda his way, dictatorial way you can call it. Of course, you may not like this, but by and large his way successfully. You talk about the big things that break Africa, corruption. Big things that break Africa, death or absence of political institutions and organizations. Talk about the key things that kill Africa, lack of basic services for the majority of ordinary peoples. When it comes to some of those things, Kagame actually has done this rather well for Rwanda. And not only has he done that, he's done it to the extent that he's able to speak as one of the big African names, as African leaders at maybe Addis Ababa for argument's sake, and he will be heard. And he's one of those few people who, on the global stage, amongst African voices and names, away from the sympathies around genocide, which he played very well. You know, he's heard and he's also very articulate, and he's able to make his point and make his case. Problem, though, is that what happens post-Paul Kagame in Rwanda? Problem is, post-Kagame, where is the possibility that a political party and organizations, which is an alternative to RPF, you know, in Rwanda, that exists today and wants to articulate issues relatively freely, like you guys would say do, for example, in South Africa, including when we look at you will follow your parliament and proceedings, and President Ramaphosa is seated, and you hear some of the emotive outbursts or reaction responses or pushes from the other side, and you know at the end of the day civility and nobody's going to jail. Those really are the issues, and that to me is at the background, at the back of the concerns I would have with Rwanda of tomorrow. Yeah. The Rwanda of today has put it, but has put it in his image. By and large, successfully in his image. Is it really the case with the majority of Rwandan people? Many other people will say, not many, would say that, well, you go to Rwanda, clean, neat, organized, you'll get your services, but you would feel that a particular section of the population, are really pinched and they're being compelled not to speak. And if it were Nelson Mandela feeling like that, the kind of conversation he would have with you on a broadcast, a program in the afternoon leisurely, he would possibly say, it's really not the best way to do business on this continent, particularly if you're building for the future.
You've said a mouthful, sir. And I caught on because what you have managed to do is to paint all of his successes, but there's a word you use there, and that is that when a leader obtains over 90% of the vote, the word you used was there are abnormalities in that, and you should question what those are. Take us into your confidence. What do you think are the abnormalities in Rwanda?
Take that observation as no one says, and if you like, research for others. But that said, quite clearly, again, a mouthful, but possibly insufficient for this space, but I'm quite happy to come and have an open conversation longer than your program would provide. No, quite clearly tells you that, as I said, once you get a political party that comes and does not only dominate the political space, but controls the political space 100%. And when you find the political organizations that has come with the power and might of the gun and controls it 100%, and when you come and find a political party and organization backed by the military by and large, that controls the political space over a period of one parliament, that is huge, meaning a political party that controls, just imagine it in South Africa, that a governing political party, our friends in the ANC, are there and they're enjoying the space in which the DA or EAF or no other political party is saying anything. Just imagine what would happen in 5 years. That is the picture for 5 years, and this is the picture I'm giving you for a period since 1994. So that, in part, is the abnormality. But also, on the other hand, if you have a political organization and a political campaign, and debates where you're having a monolithic one-side story, however good it is telling you that there is no other alternative. You're just having your program with an economist. Even in very basic economics in which 1 + 1 = 2. There are economists from the left who will tell you that actually the best way perhaps to build South Africa is not necessarily to enrich a particular section of the population, nor is it necessary to pool all the monies and take them to the shaky fund of South Africa, but perhaps there is a balance in between. So there will always be an alternative view on many of these things, even if it's economics. But when it comes to politics, and there is one way and no other way, no, that is the abnormality I'm talking about. The risk with that such abnormality is that you are not able to build what Barack Obama said when he visited Africa, that this continent does not need strong men. Unfortunately, predominantly strong men, no women, predominantly, but it needs strong institutions. In Kagame's case, the institutions actually, by and large, are strong. Again, credit for him there, by and large, relative to my own messy Uganda, where the institution is in the hands and pockets of one family, one man, comrade Mr. Museveni. I don't want to go there. But if it is institutions in the image of one man in Rwanda, therefore, it is still bad. There must be the alternative way.
By and large, he's managed to build a solid country. If you talk about strong institutions, that's something to be applauded. He's united the country
Indeed.
Post the genocide in 1994, and to top it off, he's grown the economy, which means that people are gainfully employed. But, yes, and you're absolutely spot on, we don't know what is going to happen after Kagame. Could he possibly be grooming a successor, therefore? Because if he is going to still be in office by 2034, which is what at least the text that we are reading assumes, that if he does get another term in office, that will set him up for another decade in office. At some point, he's going to have to give in owing to age. Is there someone that we know of, or that you may know of, who is possibly being groomed? Because if the opposition is being crushed, as you earlier alluded, because there have been these reports that dissent is crushed in Rwanda, and that's why some are suggesting that you also do not even have an independent media. Is there a possible successor then?
Just to say that actually when you talk about the opposition, you guys in South Africa are familiar with a few headlines. As far as Rwanda, South Africa is concerned, and the question of the opposition, you've had your fair share of it as a country, and is a dent on the conscience of all those concerned. But really, you're absolutely right that yes, is there a successor? It's really about a successor rather than an anointment or grooming, and I think that is a big challenge that we face on this continent. That really leaders should not be groomed by incumbents. Incumbents should create enabling spaces in which leadership emerge, whether within political parties or indeed within nation states. And leadership will only emerge when there's a free space for a possibility of somebody who grew up from the Steve Biko Sharks to be able to, over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, to challenge the guys from the privilege of Santon on issues, and then they become the top real leaders on this continent. In South Africa, you guys do relatively well, you can see, because relatively well. Why? It's because the next leader, when our president Ramaphosa retires, is not in the hands of President Ramaphosa. It's in the hands of the ANC. Ramaphosa may push to influence that. So when in a continent where we have predominantly strong men with killed institutions under arrest or in the pockets of a few individuals, the future post to those people must really be determined by those people. Those are not democracies. So really, no. Stifling opposition, stifling debate even within internal political parties and organizations, here I'm talking broadly beyond Rwanda, is not good for emergence of leaders to do exactly just that. Possibilities, meaning that if something happens as a bang, in Mozambique and Mora Machel goes down, somebody comes up and somebody comes up not as a favorite person for Samora Machel, but for the governing political party and the nation state that they freely be able to do that. That space needs open democracy. That space needs a competition of ideas. That space needs a democracy. That space needs pluralism. Those are the spaces that we're talking about and asking for on the continent beyond the boundaries of South Africa and a few other African countries. And that is the space that at the moment does not necessarily appear to be enough in Rwanda. And normally, therefore, this thing about succession, yes, talk about grooming, you're asking me, the tendency that people groom and they groom their sons, they groom their daughters, they groom their wives, they groom their families. That is terrible. I was going to use a stronger word. That is not why we fought to set South Africa and Southern Africa free and this continent free. That is not why we fought. We fought to liberate and to free, and like our founding father here in the Republic of Uganda said, who was a net contributor to your liberation struggles, we said that no, we want to be able to do it in such a manner that leadership is not as a result of accident of birth, but rather on the basis of what it is, that your conviction that you're able to provide for the country. So in Rwanda, people are looking around. Is it like in Museveni's case where the son, daughter, mother is at the core, and so therefore which son of his is going to Sanders or not? No, unfortunately, those are not there. And it's a question that I would like to discourage us having conversation over. I would rather it's about institutions and systems and leaders that emerge are personalities on the merit of their performance and their abilities and what they represent, the values that they represent, rather than whether or not they lineage from political leaders. To be fair to you, that's not necessarily what you're trying to infer. You may have been doing so rather indirectly. But no, that unfortunately is part of the challenge. And even in Rwanda, there is that conversation. And it's a conversation that we need to stop. And if you see what happened in Gabon recently, and if you see what's happening in my native Uganda, if you see what's happened in Congo, I begin to say that, like, why did we liberate this continent where a particular family goes to a state house, and when they go to a state house, the rest of other Africans become incompetent? How many first-class honors they get from which that they don't have the capacity to be leaders of this nation state? I think those are things that must stop.
Wonderful food for thought. Joseph Ochieno, thank you very much for your thoughts there. And he is a commentator on African affairs, talking to us from Uganda.